Jake Morrison stood in the middle of the huge meeting room on Nexus Prime. The room was filled with angry voices speaking in many different languages. He had been Earth's main speaker to the galaxy for 30 years. Today he felt very tired. Big round table in the center held representatives from 47 different alien species. They were all arguing about the same old problems. The Zephyrians wanted more territory. The Altarians wanted more trade rights. Everyone wanted something, but nobody wanted to give anything back. Captain Lisa Bennett sat in the front row behind Jake. Her uniform was still dirty from the emergency trip she had made from Kepler Station. She had brought terrible news. 100 humans were dead. Men, women, and children killed by Zephyrian raiders who attacked the farming colony 3 days ago. Rick Hayes, Lisa's second-in-command, watched from the back of the room. He had seen the bodies himself. Families who had been growing food to feed half the galaxy were now gone. Their only crime was being human and living too close to Zephyrian space. The alien called. Zarthik spoke from his crystal podium. His body was made of living crystal that changed colors when he talked. Right now, it was flashing angry red patterns. The humans are too emotional about this, Zarthik said in his cold voice. 200 deaths are nothing compared to the greater good of galactic peace. We must think about all species, not just one. Jake felt something snap inside his chest. 30 years of hearing the same words. 30 years of watching his people die while aliens talked about the greater good. 30 years of being told that human lives mattered less than alien politics. Emotional? Jake's voice cut through all the other noise in the room. Every alien stopped talking and looked at him. You call caring about murdered children emotional? Doctor. Amy Rodriguez sat in the science section. She had studied alien behavior for 20 years. She had warned Jake this day would come. The aliens had grown used to humans solving all their problems. They saw humans as servants, not equals. Ambassador Morrison, said the vegan representative, perhaps you should calm down and think about this more carefully. The Galactic Council will form a committee to study this incident. Committee, Jake repeated slowly. His hands were shaking with anger. Just like the committee you formed when the Corvin pirates killed 300 humans on Titan base. Just like the committee you formed when the hegemony bombed the human hospital ship. Tell me, what did those committees decide? The room became very quiet. Everyone knew the answer. The committees had done nothing. They had written reports and held meetings and formed more committees. Meanwhile, humans kept dying. Captain Bennett stood up from her seat. My people found children hiding in the grain storage rooms. They had watched their parents get killed. The youngest was only 5 years old. Very sad, said another alien representative. But we must consider that the Zephyrians were responding to human expansion into their traditional hunting grounds. Hayes had heard enough. He stood up and spoke in a loud, clear voice. Traditional hunting grounds? Those were farms. Humans were growing food that fed your people too. A hologram appeared next to Jake. It was Fleet Admiral Carl Thompson calling. From Earth, his face looked grim and determined. Carl had been Jake's friend since they were young officers together. Jake, Carl said, I have news from the Human Council. We took a vote. All 12 colony worlds voted the same way. Mars voted yes. Luna voted yes. Even the outer stations voted. Yes, it's unanimous. Jake nodded slowly. He had been expecting this call for months. The human colonies had been talking about this decision for a long time. Every attack, every insult, every time they were ignored, had brought them closer to this moment. What is the meaning of this? Demanded Zarthik. His crystal body was now flashing worried blue colors. Jake turned to face the entire Galactic Council. Representatives from 47 species looked back at him. Some seemed curious. Others looked annoyed. None of them looked worried enough. For 70 years, Jake began, humanity has served this galaxy. We have fought your wars. We have stopped your conflicts. We have fed your hungry and healed your sick. We have died on every frontier and bled in every battle. He paused and looked around the room. What have we gotten in return? Committees, investigations, delays. And when our people are murdered, you tell us to think about the greater good. Steve Parker, the human security chief, was already moving. He had received his orders an hour ago. Human personnel throughout the galaxy were getting the same message at the same time. The Sol system is closing its borders, Jake announced. All human military forces are returning home. All trade agreements are ended. All aid programs are stopped. All diplomatic missions are closed. The room exploded into shocked voices. Aliens jumped up from their seats. Some were angry. Others were confused. A few looked scared for the first time in years. "You cannot do this," shouted the Corvin delegate. "The trade routes will collapse without human protection." "Who will stop the pirates?" asked a small furry. "Alien from the Outer Rim territories." "What about the food shipments from the agricultural worlds?" demanded another. Jake smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "You should have thought about that before you decided our lives didn't matter." Dr. Rodriguez was already packing her research equipment. She had spent 2 decades studying galactic politics from the inside. Now she would study them from the outside. She suspected it would be a very different view. Captain Bennett received a message on her communication device. It was from her ship. "Captain, we're receiving withdrawal orders from all human ships in the sector. The exodus has begun. You're making a terrible mistake," Zarthik said. His crystal body was flashing rapid patterns of many colors. "The galaxy needs human leadership." "The galaxy had human leadership," Jake replied. "You rejected it. Wanted servants, not leaders. You wanted us to die for you, not live with you." Admiral Thompson's hologram flickered as the transmission began to break up. "Jake, the first evacuation ships are already moving. We'll have everyone out of alien space within 6 months." Steve Parker and his security team began escorting human personnel out of the council chamber. They moved with military precision. This was not a hasty retreat. This was a planned withdrawal that had been prepared for months. "Wait," called out a representative from the peaceful Centauri worlds. "Can we not discuss this? Perhaps we can reach some agreement." Jake stopped at the door and turned back one last time. Tried to discuss things for 70 years. You weren't interested in listening? Then why would you listen now? The great doors of the Galactic Council chamber closed behind the last human. For the first time in 70 years, the galaxy's most important decisions would be made without human input. In the hallway outside, Captain Bennett walked beside Jake. "Do you think they'll figure it out?" she asked. Jake looked through a window at the stars beyond Nexus Prime. Somewhere out there, human ships were already heading home. "They'll figure it out when the Zephyrians attack someone else. And there are no human peacekeepers to stop them. They'll figure it out when the trade routes collapse, and there are no human patrol ships to protect them. They'll figure it out when they're hungry, and there are no human food shipments coming." Rick Hayes joined them as they walked toward the human transport ship. "How long do you think it will take?" Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her packed research. "Files based on my studies of galactic power structures. I estimate 3 months before the first major conflicts begin. 6 months before the trade networks start failing. 1 year before they realize what they've lost." The human transport ship lifted off from Nexus Prime 6 hours later. As it flew away from the space station, Jake looked back at the place where he had spent 30 years of his life trying to make the galaxy a better place. Now the galaxy would have to learn to survive without humanity. He wondered if it could. Captain Nina Foster sat in her command chair aboard the research ship Discovery. The ship floated at the very edge of Sol space, just beyond the orbit of Pluto. From here, she could watch what was happening in the galaxy without being seen. 3 months had passed since the humans left the Galactic Council. 3 months since Ambassador Jake Morrison had walked out of that meeting room on Nexus Prime. Nina had been ordered to stay here and record everything that happened next. Her communication officer, Lieutenant Kelly Wright, looked up from her station with a worried expression. "Captain, I'm picking up emergency broadcasts from the Centauri sector. The Zephyrians have launched a full attack." Nina nodded grimly. She had been expecting this news. Without human peacekeepers to stop them, the Zephyrians were free to do whatever they wanted. And what they wanted was to conquer their neighbors. "Bad, is it?" Nina asked. Kelly checked her screens again. They've hit 12 systems in the past week. The local defense forces are completely overwhelmed. The Altarians are calling for help, but there's no one left to help them. On the other side of the galaxy, Chief Engineer Bobby Martinez was finishing his work on New Denver Colony. The human settlers had voted to leave rather than face the coming storm alone. Bobby was the last human on the planet, making sure all the automated systems were properly shut down. He walked through the empty streets of what had been a thriving human town. Just 6 months ago, 15,000 people had lived here, had built farms and schools and hospitals. They had made the desert planet green and beautiful. Now it was empty. The last transport ship had left yesterday. Bobby would leave on his small maintenance ship tomorrow morning. After that, New Denver would be just another dead world. Bobby's portable communicator buzzed. It was a message from his friend Tony Adams, who had been the human commander at Orion Junction. Tony was also preparing to leave his post. "Bobby, you need to hear this?" Tony's voice came through the speaker. "I just got a coded message from my Zealarian contact. Entire star systems are going dark. The hegemony wars have started again." Bobby sat down on a bench in the empty town square. He had helped build this place with his own hands. Now he was watching it die. "How many systems?" Bobby asked. "At least 30 so far, maybe more. Communication networks are breaking down. No one knows what's happening in half the galaxy anymore." Back on the Discovery, Nina received a priority message from General Patricia Cole on Luna. Patricia was in charge of coordinating the human withdrawal from all galactic territories. "Nina, I need you to monitor the vegan republics. They're about to ask for help." Nina's science officer, Dr. Susan Blake, looked up from her research station. "The vegans. But they voted against us in the council more than any other species. That's exactly why we need to watch them." Patricia's voice came through the communication system. "They're about to learn what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you." Dr. Blake had been studying galactic economics for 10 years. She understood better than most people how much the galaxy depended on human involvement. The humans didn't just fight wars and keep peace. They also maintained the trade routes, protected merchant ships, and made sure goods could move safely between stars. Captain Dr. Blake said, "I'm seeing some interesting patterns in the economic data. Interstellar trade has dropped by 40% in just 3 months. Nina wasn't surprised. "What about the agricultural shipments?" "Down by 60%. The farming worlds are too scared to send out their ships without human escort vessels." Meanwhile, on the former human colony of Roosevelt Prime, the automated defense systems were shutting down one by one. The colonists had programmed them to run for exactly 6 months after the evacuation. After that, the planet would be defenseless. Commander Janet Hill had been the last human to leave Roosevelt Prime. She was now aboard the transport ship homeward bound, carrying 3,000 colonists back to Earth through the ship's windows. She could see the planet growing smaller behind them. Roosevelt Prime had been humanity's largest agricultural world outside of soul space. It had fed over 2 billion people across 15 different species. Now those people would have to find food somewhere else. Commander Sederade, a young officer named Roy Gibson, were receiving distress calls from the Altarian home. "System. They're under attack." Janet felt a moment of sadness. She had friends among the Altarians. Not all of them had been as dismissive as Zarthik. Some had genuinely tried to treat humans as equals. "Can we help them?" Roy asked. Janet shook her head. "Our orders are clear. Not to engage with any non-human forces." The Altarians made their choice when they voted to ignore the Kepler Station massacre. Dr. Helen Murphy was working late in her research facility on Titan. She had been Earth's leading expert on galactic economics for 20 years. Now she was documenting the collapse of the interstellar economy. The numbers were staggering. In 3 months, galactic trade had shrunk more than it had in the previous 50 years. The specialized supply chains that connected hundreds of worlds were breaking down. "It's worse than I thought," Helen said to her assistant, Paul Rogers. The galaxy wasn't just dependent on human military protection. They were dependent on our entire economic system. Paul nodded as he reviewed the data. "Look at this. The Corvin sector used to import 70% of their food from human agricultural worlds. Now they're facing starvation. And the Outer Rim territories? Complete economic collapse. They don't have the industrial base to support themselves without human trade goods. Helen had warned the Galactic Council about this years ago. She had written papers explaining how interconnected the galactic economy had become, how removing humans from the equation would cause a cascade failure. No one had listened. Back on the Discovery, Kelly Wright was monitoring communications from across the galaxy. The news was getting worse every day. Captain, the Zephyrian Empire has conquered 8 more systems. They're moving toward the Altarian core worlds. Nina looked at the tactical display. The Zephyrians had been smart. They had waited until the humans left, then struck immediately. Without human peacekeepers to negotiate truces or human naval forces to enforce boundaries, they were free to expand as much as they wanted. Any word from the Galactic Council? The Council is in emergency session, but they can't agree on anything. Half the representatives are demanding military action against the Zephyrians. The other half are calling for diplomatic solutions. Dr. Blake laughed bitterly. Diplomatic solutions? Who's going to enforce them? Humans were the only ones. With enough ships and troops to back up their diplomacy, Nina received another message from General Cole. Nina, the vegan republics have officially requested military assistance from Earth. They're offering to give us exclusive mining rights to their entire home system. What was Earth's response? Silence. President Santos isn't even acknowledging their messages. Nina understood. For 70 years, humans had rushed to help whenever any species called for aid. They had spent human lives and human resources solving other people's problems. Now those same species were learning what it felt like to be ignored. Commander Tony Adams was aboard the last human transport leaving the Orion Junction. The massive space station had been humanity's main military base in the outer territories. Now it was empty, its automated systems slowly shutting down. Tony watched through the viewport as his ship pulled away from the station. Orion Junction had been his home for 15 years. He had commanded 12,000 personnel there. They'd kept peace across 50 star systems. Said his communications officer. We're receiving dozens of distress calls from the outer systems. Pirates are attacking merchant convoys. Local governments are begging for help. Tony felt a familiar urge to turn around and help. It was what humans did. It was what they had always done. But not anymore. Log the messages and forward them to Earth, Tony said. But we're not stopping. The transport ship jumped too faster than light. Speed, carrying Tony and his people toward home. Behind them, the Outer Rim territories descended into chaos. On New Denver, Bobby Martinez finished his final system check. The terraforming equipment would continue running for exactly 1 more year. After that, the planet would begin reverting to its natural desert state. Bobby climbed into his small ship and started the engines. As he lifted off from the planet's surface, he looked down at the empty human city one last time. Goodbye, New Denver, he said quietly. The ship turned toward home and disappeared into the stars. 3 months after humanity walked away, the galaxy was already falling apart. The economic networks were failing. Military alliances were crumbling. Peaceful species were being conquered by the aggressive ones. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, human observers were taking careful notes. The galaxy was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the value of friendship. Major Don Cooper stood on the bridge of the UES Watchdog at the very edge of the Oort cloud. 2 years had passed since humanity closed its borders. 2 years since they had walked away from the galaxy. Dan's job was to watch and record everything that happened beyond Saul's protective boundary. The view from his monitors was horrifying. Major, said communications specialist Janet Hill, looking up from her station with a pale face. I'm receiving reports from the former human colonies. New Shanghai is gone. Don felt his stomach drop. Gone? What do you mean gone? The hegemony? Fleets glassed the entire planet 3 days ago. 20 million people live there. Now it's just melted rock. Atan stared at the data coming across his screens. New Shanghai had been one of humanity's most successful colonies. The people there had voted to stay and try to survive without Earth's protection. They had believed they could make peace with their alien neighbors. They had been wrong, Janet continued. Reading the reports, Roosevelt Prime was hit by Corvin raiders last week. It destroyed the terraforming complex and took everything they could carry. The planet is already starting to turn back into a desert. Captain Roy Gibson was monitoring deep space communications from his stealth ship, the Ghost. He had been a spy for 20 years, but he had never seen anything like what was happening now. "The Altarians are finished," Roy reported to Don over a secure channel. "Their crystal cities have been reduced to rubble. The Zephyrians are using them as target practice." Roy had watched the attack through his ship's long-range sensors. The Altarians, who had once been so proud of their advanced civilization, had no way to fight back. Their crystal bodies were beautiful, but they were also fragile. They had evolved for art and philosophy, not for war. "How many survivors?" Don asked. "Maybe a few thousand scattered across different worlds. The Altarian species is effectively extinct." Dr. Helen Murphy was working in her research facility on Titan, analyzing the economic collapse that was spreading through the galaxy. The numbers were beyond anything she had imagined possible. "Paul," she called to her assistant, "look at these trade figures. Galactic GDP has dropped by 75%. Paul Rogers came over to examine the data. "How is that even possible? The specialization networks have completely collapsed. Worlds that spent centuries developing expertise in one area are now cut off from their markets. A planet that makes advanced computer chips can't get the rare metals they need. A world that grows exotic food can't get the containers to ship it." Helen had spent her career studying how interstellar civilization worked. Now she was watching it die. The galaxy had become so interconnected over the centuries that removing one major component had caused the entire system to fail. "What about the vegan republics?" Paul asked. Helen brought up another set of charts. "They've split into 6 separate governments. 3 of them are at war with each other. The other 3 are too busy dealing with internal rebellions to trade with anyone." The vegan republics had once been humanity's closest allies in the galaxy. They had been the first to develop faster-than-light travel. They had shared their technology freely and had always supported human proposals in the Galactic Council. But even they had voted to ignore the Kepler Station massacre. Even they had told the humans to think about the greater good instead of seeking justice for murdered children. Commander Paul Rogers was aboard the monitoring station Deep Watch, positioned just outside the former human territory. His job was to track the movements of alien fleets and refugees. "Major Cooper," Paul reported, "the Unity Collective has completely fragmented. Their central government collapsed 6 months ago. Now each planet is operating independently." Unity Collective had been one of the galaxy's most stable governments for over 300 years. They had prided themselves on their ability to bring different species together under one banner. Without human mediation to help resolve conflicts between their member species, they had torn themselves apart in less than 2 years. Any word from their leadership? What leadership? The Unity Council building on Harmony Prime was destroyed. In the Civil War, half the council members are dead. The other half are hiding in bunkers on their home worlds. Janet Hill was monitoring the emergency frequencies that alien governments use to communicate with each other. What she heard was chaos. "Major, I'm picking up distress calls from 17 different systems. Pirates are everywhere. Without human patrol ships, the space lanes are completely lawless." Don nodded grimly. The humans had maintained over 2,000 patrol ships throughout the galaxy. These ships had kept the trade routes safe and prevented small conflicts from becoming major wars. Now those routes were hunting grounds for every criminal organization in known space. What about the Outer Rim territories? They've reverted to feudalism. Local warlords are carving up territory and fighting each other for resources. Some planets have lost contact with the outside galaxy completely. Dr. Grace Turner was analyzing the biological data that human sensors were collecting from abandoned colonies. The results were heartbreaking. "The environmental controls on Kepler Station failed 8 months ago," she reported to Dan. "The atmosphere is becoming toxic. Any survivors there will be dead within a year." Kepler Station had been the human farming colony where the massacre occurred, the same massacre that the Galactic Council had dismissed as unimportant. Now the station itself was dying, taking with it the agricultural technology that had fed billions of people. 17 human colonies chose to stay and try to survive independently. 12 of them are already gone. The remaining 5 won't last another 6 months. Captain Gibson received a coded transmission from one of his contacts inside former galactic territory. The message was brief, but shocking. Major Cooper, you need to hear this. The Universal translator protocols are failing. Dan frowned. What do you mean? The computer systems that allow different species to communicate with each other are breaking down. Without human linguists to maintain them, species are losing the ability to talk to each other. This was something no one had considered. Humans had developed and maintained the translation systems that made galactic civilization possible. 47 different species, all speaking different languages, had been able to work together because human computers could translate between them instantly. Now those systems were failing. Species that had cooperated for centuries were becoming unable to understand each other. Janet picked up another emergency broadcast. Major, the hegemony forces have taken the Centauri trade corridor. They're demanding tribute from any ship that wants to pass through. The Centauri trade corridor had been the galaxy's most important shipping route. Trillions of credits worth of goods had passed through it every year. Humans had kept it neutral and safe for everyone to use. Now it belonged to whoever had the biggest guns. Paul Rogers detected movement on his long-range sensors. I'm tracking a massive refugee fleet heading toward the galactic rim. Looks like survivors from the inner worlds trying to escape the wars. How many ships? Over 3,000 vessels of various sizes. They're carrying maybe 2 million refugees. But Major, they're not heading for any inhabitable systems. They're just running. Don understood. There was nowhere safe left for them to go. Every habitable world was either at war, conquered by aggressive species, or facing its own internal collapse. Dr. Murphy finished her analysis of the galactic power structures. The results were sobering. Dan, I've been tracking which governments still exist in some form. Out of 47 species that were represented in the Galactic Council, only 12 still have functioning central governments. The rest have either been conquered, destroyed, or collapsed into civil war. 12 out of 47. And most of those 12 are hanging on by a thread. I estimate that within another year, there will be fewer than 5 stable governments left in the entire galaxy. Captain Gibson reported his latest intelligence. The Corvin Syndicate has declared themselves the new galactic government. They're demanding that all surviving species submit to their authority. Dan laughed bitterly. The Corvins? They were barely more than pirates when we left. It's exactly why they're succeeding now. They're the only ones who are already organized. For constant warfare, everyone else is learning how to fight after decades of depending on human protection. Janet received a transmission that made her hands shake. Major, I'm getting reports from the former site of Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council headquarters. It's been converted into a refugee camp. The Grand Council chamber where Ambassador Morrison made his speech is now housing displaced families. The aliens are living in the same room where they voted to ignore human concerns. Dan stared out at the stars. Somewhere beyond his view, an entire galactic civilization was dying. Species that had existed for millions of years were becoming extinct. Worlds that had been green and beautiful were turning into wastelands. The technologies and cultures that had taken centuries to develop were being lost forever. And it had all started because they couldn't be bothered to care when human. Children were murdered. Sir, Janet said quietly, do you think any of them understand what they've lost? Admiral Linda Shaw stood on the command deck of the Seoul Defense Station, watching a strange ship approach through the outer security zone. The ship was a patchwork of different technologies, clearly built from the wreckage of other vessels. Limped through space on failing engines, broadcasting an emergency signal on all frequencies. Admiral, said her communications officer, Lieutenant Frank Lewis, they're requesting permission to enter Seoul space. They claim to be survivors from the former Galactic Council. Linda had been expecting this day for 5 years. 5 years since. Humanity had walked away from the galaxy and closed their borders. 5 years since they had watched an entire civilization collapse from the safety of their own territory. How many ships? Linda asked. Just one. It's carrying maybe 200 passengers, but our sensors show they're in bad shape. Life support is failing, and they're almost out of fuel. Linda made her decision. Grant them permission to approach Earth orbit, but keep our defense fleet ready. This could be a trick. The refugee ship was escorted to a docking station above Earth. When the airlock opened, Linda was shocked by what she saw. The delegation that emerged looked nothing like the proud alien. Representatives who had once dismissed human concerns in the Galactic Council, Zarthik was the first to step out. The Altarian's crystal body was cracked and dim, missing several important pieces. His once bright colors had faded to a dull gray. Behind him came Commander Veltar of the vegan survivors, his blue skin marked with scars from radiation burns. 3 other aliens followed, representing species that Linda barely recognized. Admiral Shah Zarthik said in a voice that barely worked, "We come to beg for an audience with your leaders." Linda studied the group. These were the survivors of 47 different species that had once ruled the galaxy. Now they looked like refugees from a disaster zone. "Follow me," Linda said simply. President Maria Santos received the delegation in the orbital conference center above Earth. The room was filled with human officials and military officers. The contrast was stark. The humans looked healthy, prosperous, and confident. The aliens looked broken. The meeting was broadcast live to every human world in soul space. 8 billion people watched as the survivors of galactic civilization begged for help. Madame President Zarthik began, his damaged voice crackling through the speakers. "We come to you in our darkest hour. The galaxy is dying, Trade Minister." Frank Lewis, who had once worked with many of these species, felt a moment of pity. But he remembered the families on Kepler Station. He remembered the children who had died while these same aliens talked about the greater good. "Please," continued Commander Veltar, "we know we failed you. We know we were wrong. But billions of innocent people are suffering for the mistakes of their leaders." Dr. Grace Turner, the President's science advisor, reviewed her latest reports. The numbers were staggering. 40% of all known intelligent species had been driven to extinction in just 5 years. Entire sectors of space were now empty of life. The Zephyrian Empire conquered 60 systems before they ran out of resources, Veltar explained. Now their own worlds are starving. The Corvin Syndicate controls the major trade routes, but there's nothing left to trade. President Santos listened without expression. She had been a young senator when the humans left the galaxy. She had voted for the withdrawal. Now, as Earth's leader, she had to decide whether humanity would return. "What exactly are you asking for?" the president said. Zarthek's crystal body flickered weakly. "Complete submission to human authority. We offer you control of all surviving governments. We will give you tribute of any resources you desire. We will surrender our homeworlds, if you wish." The room fell silent. These proud species, who had once seen humans as servants, were now offering to become servants themselves. "The great libraries of Altair are destroyed," Zarthik continued. "Millions of years of accumulated knowledge are gone. The genetic repositories of the Unity Collective were lost in the civil wars. The cultural centers of a dozen worlds have been reduced to ash." Dr. Turner had seen the reports. Entire civilizations had been wiped out so completely that only their names remained in human databases. Technologies that had taken centuries to develop were lost forever. Art and literature from across the galaxy had been destroyed in the endless wars. "How many survivors are there?" asked General Patricia Cole, who had overseen the human withdrawal 5 years earlier. "We estimate fewer than 50 billion sentient beings remain alive in the entire galaxy," Veltar answered. "Down from over 800 billion when you left us." The numbers were almost impossible to comprehend. In 5 years, 94% of galactic civilization had been destroyed. A third alien representative, a small furry creature named Kexler, from the Outer Rim, spoke in a whisper. "Our children are born into a universe of war and starvation. They have never known peace. They have never seen the stars as anything but darkness." President Santos thought about her own daughter, who had been born after the withdrawal. The child had grown up in a soul system that was peaceful and prosperous. Human technology had advanced rapidly without the constant drain of galactic conflicts. Earth was a paradise compared to what lay beyond their borders. "We have offered you everything," Zarthik said desperately. "What more can we give?" "Trade." Minister Lewis spoke up. "You could have offered us respect, could have offered us equality, could have offered us justice when our people were murdered." "We know," Veltar said, his voice breaking. "We were fools. We were proud and stupid and blind. But please do not let innocent people pay for our mistakes." Admiral Shaw watched the aliens carefully. She had fought beside some of these species in the old days. She had respected them once. She also remembered watching human colonies burn while alien bureaucrats formed committees. "You had 70 years to learn these lessons," President Santos said coldly. 70 years to treat us as partners instead of servants. "Why should we believe you've really changed?" "Because we have nothing left," Kexter whispered. "No pride, no power, no hope. We have learned what the galaxy looks like without human guidance. We have learned what we really are without you." Turner presented her analysis to the room. "Madam President, based on current trends, we estimate that intelligent life in the galaxy will be extinct within 10 years. Not just the governments or the civilizations, the actual species themselves." The weight of that statement settled over the room. Humanity would soon be alone in the galaxy. Hundreds of species that had evolved over millions of years would be gone forever. "There is something else," Zarthik said quietly. "Something we must tell you about the cost of our failure." President Santos raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "The children," Veltar said, his voice filled with pain. "An entire generation has grown up knowing only war and hunger. They do not know how to live in peace. They do not know how to cooperate or build or create. They only know how to fight and take and destroy." "What are you saying?" "You're saying that even if some of us survive, we may have lost the ability to be civilized," Kexter explained. "Our cultures, our values, our knowledge of how to live together peacefully. It is all being forgotten." Dr. Grace Turner had seen reports about this. Children who had been born after the collapse were growing up as savage as their environment. Without stable societies to teach them, they were reverting to primitive behaviors. "The galaxy is not just dying," Zarthik said. "It is forgetting how to live." President Santos stood up and walked to the window overlooking Earth. The planet below was green and blue and beautiful. Cities sparkled in the sunlight. Ships moved peacefully between Earth and the other human worlds. "You want us to save you?" she said without turning around. "But who will save us from becoming like you? Who will protect us from the chaos you've created?" "We will," Veltar said desperately. "We will do anything you ask. We'll follow any rules you set. We will accept any punishment you choose." "Words," General Cole said bluntly. "You gave us words before. You gave us committees and investigations and promises. None of it stopped. Are people from dying?" The aliens had no answer for that. They sat in silence, waiting for judgment. President Santos finally turned back to face them. "We will consider your request. You will be given comfortable quarters while we make our decision." "How long will you need?" Zarthik asked. "As long as it takes," the president replied. "You waited 5 years to ask for our help. We can wait. As long as we need to decide whether you deserve it." The aliens were escorted to guest quarters on the station. For the first time in 5 years, representatives of the former galactic civilization were under human protection. But everyone in the room knew the truth. The real decision had been made long ago, when Ambassador Jake Morrison walked out of the Galactic Council chamber. Now humanity would decide not whether to help, but how much help the galaxy deserved. The debate that would determine the fate of the galaxy was about to begin. The great debate hall on Luna was packed with representatives from every human world. Senator Chris White of Mars stood at the main podium, his face red with anger as he spoke to the crowd. "We built something beautiful here," Chris said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Look around you. Our children grow up in peace. Our worlds are prosperous. People are happy. Why should we throw it all away to save species that celebrated when we left?" Loud cheers came from the Mars delegation and several other groups. The isolationist faction had grown strong during the 5 years of human prosperity. They had watched soul space become a paradise while the galaxy burned outside their borders. Dr. Nancy Green stood up to respond. She represented the humanitarian, a faction that wanted to help the alien survivors. Her voice was calm but passionate. "We're not talking about governments and politicians," Nancy said. "We're talking about children who are starving because their parents were too proud to listen. We're talking about entire species facing extinction because their leaders made bad choices." The debate had been going on for 3 years. Every human world had held town meetings, legislative sessions, and public forums. The same question was asked everywhere. Should humanity return to save a galaxy that had never valued their sacrifice? On Ceres, the small colony of vegan survivors watched the human debates with desperate hope. Veltar sat in the observation center they had been given, monitoring the broadcasts from the human worlds. His blue skin had grown pale during the years of waiting. "Any news?" asked his aide, a young vegan named Kilara who had been born after the collapse. "The vote is still too close to predict," Veltar replied. "The humans are divided almost equally." Kilara had never seen the galaxy before it fell apart. She had grown up hearing stories about the great civilizations that once existed among the stars. To her, they were just stories. She could not imagine a universe where different species worked together in peace. Back on Luna, Admiral Linda Shaw presented the military analysis to the assembled representatives. "If we choose to intervene, we're looking at a massive commitment. The galaxy's infrastructure is completely destroyed. It would take decades to rebuild even basic communication networks." Senator White jumped up again. "Decades of human lives and human resources spent fixing problems we didn't create. How is that fair to our children?" Trade Minister Frank Lewis stood to address the crowd. "I've run the economic projections. Rebuilding galactic civilization would cost us approximately 40% of our total resources for at least 20 years. The number caused a stir in the audience. 40% was enormous. It would mean lower living standards for every human. It would mean postponing research projects, infrastructure improvements, and colonization efforts. But Frank continued, "We also need to consider what happens if we do nothing. In 10 years, we'll be completely alone in the galaxy. There will be no other intelligent life left." Dr. Grace Turner presented her scientific analysis. From a biological perspective, the loss of genetic diversity would be catastrophic. Hundreds of millions of years of evolution would be erased forever. Young Tim Davis, a college student from the Europa colony, stood up in the gallery. He was only 19 years old, born after the withdrawal. To him, the alien species were just names in history books. "I found something in the archives," Tim said nervously. "A message from before the collapse." The hall fell quiet as Tim activated a holographic projector. A small girl appeared in the air above the crowd. She looked about 8 years old, with bright eyes and a cheerful smile. "Hi, my name is Lucy," the girl said in the recording. "I live on Kepler Station with my mom and dad. I wanted to make this message for the time capsule project at school." Veltar recognized the setting behind the girl. It was Kepler Station, the human farming colony, where the massacre had taken place. The same massacre that the Galactic Council had dismissed as unimportant. "I want to be a galactic ambassador when I grow up," Lucy continued. "Like Ambassador Morrison. I want to help all the different species learn to get along better." The girl pointed to someone off camera. "That's my friend Zilinex. She's Altarian, and she's teaching me how to speak in light patterns. And over there's Corthon. He's vegan, and he's really good at math." Tim's voice was shaky as he spoke to the crowd. This message was sent 3 days before the Zephyrian raid. Lucy died with her parents and 200 other humans. But listen to what she says next. The holographic girl continued talking. "Well, some of the grown-ups think that different species can't be friends. But they're wrong. We're all friends at school. Maybe when I grow up I can show them how to do it." Lucy smiled directly at the camera. "The aliens aren't bad. Most of them are just scared and don't know how to fix things. Maybe when I grow up, I can help them learn." The message ended, leaving the hall in complete silence. Many people were crying. Even Senator White had tears in his eyes. Tim wiped his face before speaking again. "Lucy never got the chance to grow up. Maybe we can finish what she started." The recording went viral across human space within hours. It was broadcast on every human world. People who had never cared about the galactic crisis suddenly found themselves thinking about a little girl who had believed in friendship between species. President Maria Santos watched the vote tallies coming in from across soul space. The numbers were changing rapidly as people saw Lucy's message. The humanitarian faction was gaining support, Madam President, said her aide. The final results are in from all 12 colony worlds. Maria nodded. She had been expecting this outcome since Lucy's message was broadcast. Mars voted yes by a margin of 2%. Luna voted yes by 5%. Even the outer colonies voted yes. The final tally was 52% in favor of limited re-engagement with the galaxy. It was a narrow margin, but it was enough. Maria had been preparing for this decision for months. She activated the communication system that would broadcast her announcement to every human world and to the alien survivors waiting on Ceres. My fellow humans, Maria began, today we face a choice that will define us as a species. We can remain safe in our prosperous isolation, or we can take the risk of helping others. Zarthik watched the broadcast from his quarters on the space station. His crystal body flickered weakly as he listened to the human president.
We have
decided to return to the galaxy, Maria announced. Not as we did before. We will not serve as your police or your mediators. We will not sacrifice our people for your conflicts. We will not enable your dependence on our strength. The aliens, listening to the broadcast, felt a mixture of hope and fear. Humanity was returning, but on completely different terms. Instead, Maria continued, we will act as teachers and guides. We will help you rebuild your civilizations, but you must do the work yourselves. We will share our knowledge, but you must prove you have learned from your mistakes. Admiral Shaw began preparing the first restoration fleet. Unlike the old peacekeeping forces, these ships would be heavily armed and ready to defend themselves. Humanity would never again be taken advantage of. The new galactic order will be built on equality, not servitude, Maria explained. Humans will participate as partners, not servants. Any species that threatens human lives or human interests will be cut off from all aid immediately. Dr. Nancy Green was chosen to lead the humanitarian mission. She had spent years advocating for helping the alien survivors. Now she would oversee the careful rebuilding of galactic civilization. This will not be easy, Maria warned. Rebuilding the galaxy will take generations. Many of you will never see the results of our efforts. But we do this not for ourselves, but for the future. The first restoration fleet launched 6 months later. Admiral Shaw commanded the flagship Phoenix as it left Sol space for the first time in 8 years. Behind her came medical ships, supply vessels, and construction crews. But the most important cargo was not equipment or supplies. It was the hard-won wisdom of a species that had learned the difference between helping and enabling. As the fleet approached the ruins of Nexus Prime, Admiral Shaw opened a communication channel to the waiting alien survivors. "This is Admiral Shaw of the Human Restoration Fleet," she announced. "We have returned. But understand this. We are not here to save you. We are here to teach you how to save yourselves." The response from Zarthik was immediate and grateful. "We understand, Admiral. We are ready to learn." The first lesson would be the hardest one: how to be worthy of friendship. The galaxy would never again take humanity for granted. And humanity would never again mistake service for subservience. The long journey back to civilization was about to begin.